Hi, this is Josh Kilroy with Living in Kindness, and this is the second part of our series on Stephen Batchelor's uh, classic book, Buddhism Without Beliefs. It's a close reading, so we go through some of the text, and then I have some comments on those. We are in the first session. We got about halfway through the first chapter. So I'm going to pick right up there and continue on. And I'll just start by sort of rereading the last part that we covered in the last segment, just to ground us. Um, Batchelor writes, the Buddha was not a mystic. His awakening was not a shattering insight into a transcendent truth that revealed to him the mysteries of God. He did not claim to have had an experience that granted him privileged esoteric knowledge of how the universe ticks. Only as Buddhism became more of a religion were such grandiose claims imputed to his awakening. He spoke of having discovered, in describing to the five ascetics what his awakening meant, he spoke of having discovered complete freedom of the heart and the mind and mind from the compulsions of craving. And he called such freedom the taste of the Dharma. So complete freedom of the heart and mind from the compulsions of craving. Batchelor here, as I mentioned last time, is really trying to put uh, the what he calls Dharma practice on a different footing than sort of many of the sort of formal Buddhist traditions, and he's asking us to look through some of these sort of formal takes. And his claim basically is that the Buddha is presenting sort of living, direct uh, uh, discoveries, and to use them, in a concrete way to heal himself and ultimately to heal others. And he contrasts that with sort of, doctrines and beliefs that a formal religion has. And so, sort of, um, the sort of um, the antagonists in this drama are the people who took the sort of living teachings of the Buddha and turned them into formal doctrines and formal structures. So he's trying to recreate something that we can use today that come directly sort of the inspiring sort of living teachings of the Buddha. Um, and so he talks about, he says here, the Buddha awoke from the sleep of existential confusion. So shocking and unexpected was this experience that he initially assumed that were he to speak of it, no one would understand him. So the teaching, the sort of myth is that um, once the Buddha uh, had these insights, that he remained at the Bodhi tree, sort of wondering what to do with them, and they were so profound that you know it was unclear that people would be able to understand them, and so a person who is asleep is either lost in deep unconsciousness or absorbed in a dream. So, the Buddha sort of uh, could be talking to somebody who is just oblivious to these questions of the human experience, for which his teachings are an explanation, or they're so wrapped up in their own um divisions and pursuits that they're not interested. They're either caught up in running their shop or whatever other beliefs, caught up in some other religion or whatnot, and so unable to hear what the Buddha would have to say. Um, so he, the first two truths, anguish and its origins, right? So the first truth being life is suffering, so to speak, life is anguish in Batchelor's terms. And the second noble truth, that the cause of this anguish is craving, describe the dilemma. And the second two truths, the third and the fourth noble truth, are its resolution. So the third noble truth is that the cessation of craving is enlightenment, and the path. So basically, the fourth noble truth is to follow what is now known as the Noble Eightfold Path, or my preference personally is the middle way. Um, and so the Buddha experienced these truths as ennobling. And so in this rendering, and to be clear, this is a very particular take of the Buddha mythology to make broader points. But, so ennobled was the Buddha that when he reemerged and had his first sustained encounter with other people, namely the five ascetic monks he had been working with prior to retreating to meditate on his the meditation that ultimately resulted in these truths. When these five monks saw him again, they were poised to reject the Buddha based on their previous interactions with him. But so compelling was the Buddha in his integrity and in his sort of luminous virtue, enlightenment, that they overcame their initial objections and were drawn to the Buddha. And this led to the so-called first sermon, um, but and the first sermon is where he lays out what are now known as the Four Noble Truths. Just a quick note, um, because there was no literature around the Buddha written down for hundreds of years until after he died. It's There's not a lot of clarity on the how these ideas formed. Um, there are some people who think that first the first doctrines were sort of the middle way and impermanence, and that these later developed into the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Um, but the way it's written, the Four Noble Truths become the sort of first sermon of the Buddha, um, and um, this is where we get to really the heart of the matter. Instead of presenting himself as a savior, Batchelor writes, the Buddha saw himself as a healer. He presented his truths in the form of medical diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment. If you have a pain in your chest, you first need to acknowledge it. Then you go to a doctor for examination. He diagnoses the cause of the pain and tells you what the cure is. And then if it's curable, you get a course of treatment. Um, and and so that's a much different sort of metaphor. I mean, many religious leaders, are considered healers, but Batchelor means to make that a very direct metaphor, and really less a metaphor than an actual statement of fact. Um, while Buddhism suggests another belief system, Dharma practice suggests a course of action. And so, just for myself, if people ask me, "Are you a Buddhist?" I always say yes. That's where that's where I come from. But if people ask me, "Well, what do you do?" I say I do Dharma practice, um, because precisely this, as the Batchelor says here, the four ennobling truths are not propositions to believe; they are challenges to act. And really, we're at the heart of the matter here. These next couple of pages, I believe, are among the most profound pages um, ever written. I'll just put it that way. Um, and so Batchelor develops a whole analogy with Alice in Wonderland. I won't really get into all of that. Um, um, but essentially, when the Buddha presents his four truths, he first describes what each refers to, then enjoins his listeners to act upon them. Once we grasp what he means when he refers to by anguish, we are enjoined to understand it. So, if the truth of anguish is the first noble truth, the immediate course of action is to understand it, to understand our anguish, our understand, our suffering, and again, I mentioned this last time, but anguish is a very particular choice that Batchelor makes, where most people traditionally use suffering. Some scholars suggest unsatisfactoriness as a better understanding. Um, the point is to sort of move, when we think of suffering, we think of physical pain or sort of pressing mental pain. Um, and those are certainly sufferings, but what the Buddha is trying to get at is more that sort of chronic life isn't, life isn't satisfying. Life is, whatever, whatever. If we get what we want, it doesn't satisfy. There's always, people dying. There's this impermanence to life that never, that makes it an unsteady foundation for happiness, right? Um, and so understanding that anguish, that sort of chronic unsatisfactoriness, um, is really what the first noble truth is about: the understanding, identifying its cause, what so. So it challenges our habitual relationship to anguish. So if there's something that causes us anguish, Batchelor here, uses the example of, oh, we have a friend, but they may not like us anymore, and the worry about, oh, my friend doesn't like me anymore, by sort of letting it sort of solidify as a worry, it becomes a thing and it becomes frozen in time. And without, if by sort of obsessing about it or even avoiding it or just not seeking not to understand it, it becomes this thing that immobilizes us, and that reinforces the anguish. But Batchelor says, interprets the Buddha, anguish maintains its power only as long as we allow it to intimidate us. By habitually regarding it as fearful and threatening, we we fail to see the words etched by the Buddha, understand me. If we try to avoid a powerful wave looming above us on the beach, it will send us crashing into the sand and surf. But if we face it head on and dive right into it, we discover only water. To understand a worry is to know it calmly and clearly for what it is: transient, contingent, and devoid of intrinsic identity. Whereas to misunderstand it is to freeze it into something fixed, separate, and independent. Worrying, again, this example about worrying about a friend. Um, so if we're worried about a friend, this perception induces a mood of feeling psychologically blocked, stuck, and obsessed. The longer this undignified state persists, the more we become incapable of action. The challenge of the first truth is to act before habitual reactions incapacitate us. Um, so, again, I think this is one of the most powerful things that I personally have read. Um, and this, uh, because it's a core insight into psychology, it's something we run into every day. Um, one of the one of the things that first drew me to Buddhism was the sense that, um, like, I would get stuck in my head about some situation, and I would daydream about it, sort of compulsively, you know, uh, and like, and it was almost like trying to come up with like a snappy comeback to an ex-girlfriend, or something crazy like that. But that was a way of fixing it, freezing it, making it something separate, and that gave it power. Whereas, like, if and I do this just because this happened recently. I have, like there's always an opportunity to practice these, because it's so central to our human psychology. Like, I was thinking about somebody I dated in college, and there was she was in my head for she died a few years ago, and she came into my head, and I was sort of having this daydream about saying something to her that sort of flipped the flipped the script on what actually happened in our relationship. So, in that situation, like, just applying this here, like, rather than getting caught up in sort of reenacting a fantasy in my head, I took the opportunity to try to understand it, and understand why I was thinking about somebody who died 6 years ago, who I hadn't seen in 30 some odd years. Why she was sort of stuck on a loop in my head. And by choosing to try to understand it, I had some insight into what was really going on. And it really had more to do, you know, with things going on in my life, in my career, for instance. Um, and, that sort of got me out of that loop. Um, so really, that's why I find this so powerful. Like, it gives you something concrete to focus on. It identifies a real problem, and it gives you a concrete action. Um, so, um, so then Batchelor moves on. So that's sort of the first noble truth, right? The reality of anguish, and the corresponding need to understand it in its concreteness, right? A similar procedure can be applied to the other truths. Just as the presence of anguish is an opportunity for understanding, so the presence of the self centered craving that underlies it is an opportunity for letting go. So, because obviously the second truth is that anguish is caused by craving, by desire, and so the corresponding task, um, to that insight, is to let go, right? Like, just to continue the example I used earlier, like, my ex girlfriend is no longer with us. Like, there's nothing about that I can control, right? But I can let go of certain thoughts about, like, oh, if this had happened, the relationship would have worked, or this or that. Like, none of that craving is, not, is just is underlying the anguish. The craving is actually not for the relationship. It's for, like, moving forward with my life in other ways, right? Um, But so whenever such feelings arise, so the cravings, the habitual reaction is either to indulge them or deny them. Um, and so again, the corresponding insight is to let go. Letting go is not a euphemism for stamping out craving. Um, as with anguish, letting go begins with understanding, a calm and clear acceptance of what is happening. While craving, the second truth, may be the origin or cause of anguish, the first truth, this does not mean that they are two separate things, any more than the sprout is separate from the daffodil that emerges from it. Um, Letting go of a craving is not rejecting it, but allowing it to be itself, a contingent state of mind that once arisen will pass away. Um, and really, that's why, like, for instance, and just again to bring my experience into this, that's why meditation is so important. It is literally practice of letting go. Um, and so instead of forcibly freeing ourselves from it, we notice how its very nature is to free itself. Like once I was meditating and thinking about, oh, this ex-girlfriend and, sort of like my mind wants to move on, right? It doesn't want to stay there. It wants to let go once I understood sort of like this dynamic of like, I still have I'm still comparing myself to, for instance, the aspirations I had in college, which was really the core of the matter, right? I'm measuring myself against standards that I moved on from, consciously, but not unconsciously. And so these sort of unconscious anxieties and anguish sort of materialize in this craving. And once I understand it, the first step, the second noble truth is to let it go. So again, I mean, the opportunity is ever present to put these insights into practice. Um, by letting go of craving, it will finally cease. The cessation allows us to realize, if only momentarily, the freedom, openness, and ease of the central path. The sudden gap in the rush of self centered compulsion and fear allows us to see with unambiguous immediacy and clarity the transient and unreliable and contingent nature of reality. Dharma practice at this moment has relinquished the last traces of belief. It is founded on an authentic vision born of experience. It no longer requires the support of moralistic rules and religious ritual. It is grounded on integrity and creative autonomy. In revealing life in all its vulnerability, it becomes the doorway to compassion. Um, Again, this is among the most profound insights I've come across in my life. And the core of what he's getting at here is that with the act of letting go, once you achieve it, even momentarily, once you have that moment of clarity, um, you move from a position of sort of like ideas of how to move on, or to an actual experience of it. Like once you have that actual moment of living without the craving, authentically, in real time, um, without with freedom. Like once you have that experience, that will be your North Star, not rituals, not rules, but that experience. Now, that experience is momentary, and you'll get back in the thick of things, and you'll have cravings and anxieties and all of that. But by having that experience, you have the map, and you can always get back on the road, on the path. Um, and so he builds from that. I do want to keep these videos under a half an hour, so I'm going to use that as a marker to stop. But that is really profound. It's like, and like an example would be, um, like an alcoholic or a drug addict who has that day where they don't use, and they have the cravings, and the cravings go away, right? And once they have that, they know that they can do it. And there might be other days in the future where they fall off the wagon, so to speak, but they know they can do it, and that the belief that they can live drug free or alcohol free is not just a belief; it's something they have a direct experience of, and that can help them on their path. Um, Anyways, I'm going to stop there. And so next on the next session, we'll move on to the Noble Truths 3 and 4. Thank you so much for joining us.